Welcome to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti Semitism. I'm Evelyn Marcus.
And I am Phyllis Zimbler Miller.
The lack of self governance of the Palestinians is generally blamed on Israel and Jews in general. It currently drives one of the most virulent waves of anti Semitism in Jewish history. Now that we have a new situation in the Middle East and also in the White House, we are going to take a fresh look at the question, what should happen with the Palestinians? Today we discuss this with Jarrow Rogovin in Los Angeles, California. Jarrow is a philanthropic supporter of Jewish and pro-Israel organizations and think tanks and has made a lifelong study of the issues affecting Israel. He also recently wrote a 25-page paper with his view on what the policy should be of the major players in the Middle East to end this endless war between Israel and the Palestinians. Jarrow, welcome to our podcast and thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Evelyn. Greatly appreciate it.
So, in your paper, you write about what the creation of a Palestinian state could lead to. Do you think it would lead to peace in the Middle East?
It would lead to a more dangerous, an increased ability to act on the anti-Semitism of the Palestinian culture. You in your introduction, you mentioned the perception that Israel is to blame for the lack of a Palestinian state. Israel was in the Camp David Accords. Israel was left with retaining Gaza by Sadat, backed by President Carter, specifically because President Sadat did not want a Palestinian state. He was adamantly opposed to it.
Can we remind our listeners about the Camp David Accords? What year?
1978. President Sadat said, I would do anything for peace. And there was an interview with Barbara Walters. And Prime Minister Begin said, do you really mean it? Through Walters. And Sadat said, I really mean it. And Begin said, do you really mean it? And Begin said, I really mean it. And Begin said, come to Jerusalem. And they were stuck on a few issues. And now, by the way, very interesting. The initiative was basically Sadat's, and he undertook it because Jimmy Carter was pushing for a Middle East conference where it would be all 22 Arab states on one side and Israel on the other, with daylight between America and Israel for our credibility, supposedly. Sounds familiar. And Sadat didn't want that because he knew absolutely it would result in a Palestinian state that would threaten the stability of the region and be a hotbed, a stronghold of the Muslim Brotherhood.
So now let's come back to today.
Understand, the Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna, an Egyptian. Mein Kampf was written in 1922, published in 23, and by 28 it had been translated to Arabic. Al-Banna and a guy named Khatub read it. They wedded fundamentalist political Islamism to Nazism. And that is the Muslim Brotherhood.
And that is Hamas.
Dangerous doctrine.
Yeah. And so you're saying the Egyptian president Sadat was also not wanting a Palestinian state because he thought that will not bring peace in the Middle East.
Yeah, and yes, and al-Banna ended up hanged in Egypt for treason. He was attempting to overthrow the state.
Yeah, the ideologist of the Muslim Brotherhood was hanged in Egypt in the 1960s. So, so basically, your answer is the creation of a Palestinian state would not lead to peace in the Middle East, and you think that Israel is not the only one who thinks that, and you think that that is because of Palestinian culture. Is that correct?
Yes,
What is Palestinian culture, according to you?
it's been, well, not according to me, it's been labeled a culture of death, a death cult. The difference between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas is they're both anti-Israel, anti-West. The difference is the PA is nominally secular, and the Hamas sees itself as the keystone of what would ultimately be a caliphate. Hamas is more open about its interim goal of not just the destruction of Israel, but also taking over Jordan. That the original total Palestine mandate from the League of Nations would become Palestine.
So, what can you envision a solution that, you know, it would bring peace between Israel and the Palestinian state?
Um, that piece would come very slowly. The thing to do is to, I would say, get to a point of security, a point of non-aggression. That at what point a cold peace would become a ceasefire. That has to be more than a hudna. The idea of HUDNA. It's a Arabic term for temporary truce while the aggressive party prepares for another assault. And of course, people are concerned that what's going on right now, and then this phased process between Israel and Hamas right now, with Qatar involved and so on and so on, is just was simply a hudna. And
A
of
hudna,
course,
a truce that allows
A
Hamas to
respite.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's truce in name only. It's insincere. It's not genuine. It's dangerous because a fundamental principle in military doctrine is to be able to prevent your enemy from being able to reconstitute. We see this in The Art of War by Sun Tzu and Clausewitz, current military modern doctrine. And the problem is Hezbollah, Hamas have been able to reconstitute every time. North
So,
Korea, it reconstituted. We can't allow this.
but do you see a solution that could bring peace between Israel and the Palestinians and that would be morally right towards the Palestinians?
Yes. Um, what it really means is an end of Palestinianism. And by the way, Palestinian state would not serve the Palestinians' interest. We see this not just from Gaza, but the West Bank, which is corrupt. It's a kleptocracy. It's brutal. People have been even beaten to death there by security forces, and much worse, much more frequent in Hamas. You might call it in situ citizenship, and it's a region-wide solution. Wherever a Palestinian is, they become a citizen. And
So you
that
mean,
plan,
wait, am I clarifying? So if a Palestinian happens to be residing in Jordan right now, they become a Jordanian. Is that what you're
well, they
saying?
are. There they
They are.
are. They
Yes.
are the one country that did it right. And it needs to be discussed a bit, just in terms of the history, where in 71, Arafat, the PLO, did try and overthrow King Hussein, and he brought out the artillery and tanks, killed 10 to 25,000. Nobody knows how many, as long as we're talking about genocide. and they were kicked into Tunisia. All right.
So,
But the
okay.
problem is that there are Palestinians who are still refugees, and UNRWA's there, in Lebanon, in Syria, and of course Gaza. And this is ridiculous. There's even, and very few people know this, it's bizarre. There is actually a kind of caste system in the West Bank. There are West Bankers who have always lived in, say, Bethlehem. But if they were displaced 10 miles from what's today Israel to inside the Green Line, inside the West Bank, they're very often a second-class citizen there, and they don't have quite the same status and rights and so on as somebody who was not displaced. It's very bizarre.
So what should happen with the people, with the Palestinians who live in Gaza, the Palestinians who live on the West Bank? What should happen with them?
Funny thing about that, but Gaza was part of Egypt at one point. Maybe it should go back. All due respect, President Trump, but ultimately it's got to go. And by the way, this actually makes President Trump's vision possible to make a better place. And let me sidebar that for a moment. During President Bush's administration, Bush #2, Gaza, we forget this, was the fastest growing economy in the world. Did you know that? Do you remember that? Yeah. And they were talking about turning Gaza into another Singapore.
Mm.
And they opted for Hamas. End of story.
Yes.
By the way, that was Condoleezza Rice's idea. That in order to give legitimacy to the election in 2005 in Gaza, Hamas should be allowed to win. And Israel say, be careful what you ask for. It's not such a great idea. Well, Hamas won. And then to seal the deal, there was a brutal, ugly civil war. They purged Fatah, the PA people. Some were lined up, shot in the back of the head. Others were kneecapped, and so on. It was dreadful. There's one quite ironic moment where there were a number of PA soldiers.
PA? Could you say what?
Palestinian Authority, sorry.
Yeah.
Palestinian Authority soldiers in Gaza who literally ran for their lives. They stripped down to their underwear and they ran across the border into Israel. Stripped down to the underwear so they wouldn't be shot. You see, we have nothing hidden, no bomb, no hand grenade, no gun. They literally ran for their lives to Israel.
Because they thought Hamas was going to kill them.
They didn't just think. They knew they weren't going to be killed. They were being pursued. They ran for their lives. Now, and again, the bad faith of the PA, of Abbas, his own people here running for their lives. What did he do? He kept them in Israel for 3 months before he would allow them into the West Bank even.
So you say the Gaza Strip should go to Egypt.
Yes.
Why?
And
Why?
Populated parts of the West Bank to Jordan, and then in the whole, I'll get there in a moment.
Yeah.
And then how we force it is we say, look, we give you billions of dollars a year, as does Europe, as does Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. So it's U.S. leadership and the bully pulpit of the U.S. president to go to Europe, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and say collectively, this is mega billions. Now they either cooperate or we snap the checkbooks closed. We did that to Egypt before with Morsi, and that resulted in General Sisi becoming President Sisi. That's how Morsi was ousted. That's why he was ousted, because the lenders cut off the Arab lenders cut off aid. They had it with Muslim Brotherhood Morsi. And they were even doing quote unquote virginity checks on women in Egypt in the streets, on the sidewalks.
I remember that.
Unbelievable the stuff that was going on with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. All right, now why? Because Egypt has to change, Jordan has to, and that's also part of it. The Palestinians need adult supervision. And they can't rule themselves. They demonstrated this for 140 years. There's no umpteenth zillionth chance. Enough already. Dayenu. But there are Palestinians, and it's a Jewish principle, who do want peace. I'm 20% of them. So for the sake of the righteous, we say, we do this. For the sake of the future righteous, when people change, like Germany was changed, like Japan was changed. But Egypt, Jordan, they have to be changed. They need to be compelled to change their culture. They have to stop hating Jews, Christians, America, the West. They have to adapt civil norms. They can't keep going this way. It's too dangerous, not only for themselves, because they create expectations of the destruction of Israel and a war against the West and so on. They don't deliver, well, they'll get overthrown for the guy who promises a better war. That's what's going on between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority and Islamic Jihad. You know, we have to end this contest of who leads the war against the Jews and the West.
So you're saying, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say, I'm thinking about some research I'm doing right now. When the Americans brought in, and this is not my area of expertise, but I think I'm talking about the Marshall Plan, and one of the things they did is they changed the textbooks. They got rid of all Hitler's textbooks that he had put in. And I'm sure that there were such warmongering textbooks in Japan. So until, this is my belief, until every single textbook in all those countries is thrown out and modern textbooks are put in, anything any of us say is a waste of time.
You're absolutely right, Phyllis. You know, they found many dozens of copies of Mein Kampf in Gaza in this war, in Arabic, of course. There's a group led by Marcus Schaff called Impact SE. I'm sure you've heard of them. And they do marvelous work along the lines of exactly what you're describing. And they've achieved changes, for instance, in the textbooks of Saudi Arabia. And this, the tenor, and this is all my paper, by the way. This is a long paper. It's 25 pages, single spaced. And the mosques, the news, the school books, the music, the movies, everything, it has to change. You know, even Egypt made a movie about the bloodline of killing a boy, a little boy, for his blood to make matzah. Egypt made a movie like this. It's unreal.
So Jarrow,
Mubarak is snarky. It's
so
we give him millions, billions, no strings attached, no conditions, no quid pro quo.
So you're saying, if I hear you well, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if I didn't hear you correctly. You're saying the Palestinian people are not entitled to their own state because in 140 years they haven't proved they're able to have a peaceful state. That's what you're saying?
They haven't had a peaceful state with their neighbors. They won't have a peaceful state with the Jordanian monarchy. They won't have a peaceful state with each other. You know,
Okay.
it's a very
And
clan
you're also
and
saying,
tribe society. They don't like each other.
and you're also saying, Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon should change in they should stop hating Jews and the West. And the way to enforce that is with financial pressure from
From
the
everybody,
United States and
America,
Europe.
Europe, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates. And something that, you know, the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia needs to be reminded that a Palestinian state will be no friend of Saudi Arabia. You know, one of the things that we should be doing is getting in there with the new president of Syria, President Shara, help me on that. Shar, I think, or Shar. Anyway, because you know he's doing the rounds, visiting Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc. We need him to be aligned with Saudi Arabia, not Turkey.
And
There
why?
will
I don't understand why.
Erdogan is a rabid anti-Semite. He is Muslim Brotherhood. You know, very few people know this, but during the Afghan war, when the Soviet Union was there, he was a bundler for the Mujahideen, meaning he was a big maher with money raising.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a Muslim. He's in the Muslim Brotherhood. Yeah.
Yeah, he's Muslim Brotherhood. He's highly problematic. You know, Daniel Pipes believes, and I think he's right, that Iran will ultimately break out of its will break the hold, the grip of the Ayatollahs on their society. It's Turkey that's circling the drain. Societally, Iran wants to have civil government and be part of the West, part of the world. It's Turkey where socially itself, the whole culture is in trouble. Another reason why we want Syria to align with Saudi Arabia and not Turkey is for the sake of the Kurds, our friends. The Kurds, they've been the SDP, the Syrian Democratic Party. No, yeah, I think so. The Syrian Democratic Party, the SDP. They have been holding in the jail the ISIS prisoners. They're protecting the rest of the Middle East from many, many thousands of ISIS prisoners, while Erdogan is relentlessly attacking those Kurds.
So the,
So we really need to step up there.
so Jarrow, the the Palestinians, of course, will not agree to your solution to being cut in as a people in pieces, and one part lives there and the other part lives in another country, another part lives in another country. um okay, how can you enforce this on them?
Well, funny you should ask. A Palestinian poll says 44% of young Palestinians want out of Gaza, want out. 31% overall. Now that's taking the poll while Hamas is in charge. And that was before Gaza was leveled, before Gaza became World War II rubble. The West Bank, there if the populated areas default back to Jordan, it has to be remembered that Jordan ruled the West Bank from 1948 to 1967. Nobody complained about anything.
But we have to also remember that Jordan is an artificial country created by the British during the British Mandate. So it depends how far back you want to
all these
go.
countries are
Yeah,
artificial and created by the English mandate
yeah.
and the
Well,
French.
yeah,
And
which, by the way, was not at all racist or colonial. It was actually the nation building. The British said, "Oh, well, we got to be fair to these people. We have to give them a nation. They have to have, it was quite Wilsonian, the idea of nations expressing their nationhood and so on. So it was actually well intentioned. It wasn't so colonial and oppressive at all. It's quite the opposite. What I think that what can be done with Jordan to help strengthen the monarchy is that there are roughly 2 million, probably more, Syrian and Iraqi refugees. And the Iraqis certainly aren't going back. Questionable whether how many of the Syrian are. So again, using financial finagling, Jordan, the king of Jordan, gets told, these people are now your citizens. So they are no longer in camps. We're going to start building homes for them, infrastructure for them, and they're going to be able to own land, go to school, join the professions. They're Jordanians. That will make him popular with those people and dilute the negative influence a lot of the recidivist Palestinians who are, want to be rejectionists. And it will make it very interesting, I think, a more viable state. Egypt, Egypt, you sowed a whirlwind in 1948 when you attacked Israel. They started, I believe it was called the Fedayeen, and in the 50s it was kill a Jew a day out of Gaza, and that resulted in the Sinai War, including the buildup of the Egyptian army. Egypt then allowed the transfer of tens of thousands of arms, hundreds of thousands of arms, vast quantities of munitions across the Philadelphia corridor, the border, this 8.9-mile border of Gaza to Egypt. There's some 80 tunnels in that region. The ones between the Sinai and Gaza are big enough to drive a big pickup truck through. They're huge. Sisi's own son was involved somehow in these illicit transfers. The Bedouins who've been radicalized were profiteering off this smuggling. Egypt has a price to pay for this. They did this. They created this problem. Now they have to be part of the solution. There is no solution at all in Gaza being, it's not even a state. You're talking about a city state. It's not even as big as Singapore. And Singapore is connected to the world. Gaza is not. How can that ever be a viable anything if it's not part of Egypt? It can't. There's too many people there and no way to make it economically viable.
Do you think that this would then lead to less, let's say your vision is implement. Do you think this would lead to less anti-Semitism against the Jews?
I do, because for one, millions of Palestinians will have real lives. And as they develop their lives, eventually, things change. And again, this is going to be under supervision under management, the culture has to be changed. The tenor of the society has to be changed. And yes, on that, I think it can. You know, when you look at Israel, it's 17% or more Arabs. And after, especially October 7th, so many of them said, wow, boy, am I glad I'm an Israeli. It was a real wake up. And I think that this can be a moment, but we have to seize the time.
Jarrow, if you look at the Jewish people, we have been spread out over several countries, different countries. We built a life there at certain eras that went well. Other eras we were not allowed to do it. But in certain eras we were able to build a good life in several countries. Yet we never forgot our
ancestral homeland,
our peoplehood and where we came from, and that's the basis of Israel. So don't you expect the Palestinians to keep their Palestinian identity and keep that wish for their own country, like we had too as Jews?
Well, Palestinian identity is not equivalent to Jewish identity. We have a different religion, a different language, a different history, a different culture, a different literature, etc. When you look at nation building nationalism, we are a true nation that is able to be like the Druze, loyal to our host countries. We remain Jews and we remain Americans, British, Canadian. The Palestinians are Arabs who adopted a Palestinian idea of Palestinianism. It's more of a regionalism. It's not a real peoplehood. It's a regionalism.
Yeah, well, you're saying because they have the same
respected, right? But it's not, a nation. No. Now, does that mean Gaza gets emptied out? No, they can remain there. However, they are citizens of Egypt. And they have local governance, as we do in Los Angeles. Right? And Jordan, the West Bank, same thing, etc.
I was just going to say.
So why do you think, again? Why do you think it's not a true nation? What are your arguments for that statement?
They became a nation, after for instance, the War of Independence, 1948. You look at the West Bank, other than hatred of Israel, there were no great protests. Oh, we're not Jordanian. And again, there is not a uniqueness.
That's what I was going to clarify.
Really makes. I mean, even in Europe, as small geographically as it is, how many countries there are. Italy is not France, is not Germany, is not the Netherlands, etc. There's real differences, the language, etc., etc. How much difference is there between a Gazan and an Egyptian, between a West Banker and a Jordanian, a West Banker and a Syrian?
You're talking religion, language, although there are dialects, culture,
and history.
History.
America, you look at America, we have regional dialects. We have various cultures. Walt Whitman, the great mid and late 19th century American poet, laureate, described America as a nation of nations. So can be, Syria can be described as a nation of nations in a sense. It's got all kinds of people. And of course, the concern is that the new government respects this. We see different groups, different tribes in Morocco.
Evelyn, do you have a question before we bring this fascinating discussion to an end?
Yep.
Actually, if I could very quickly say one other thing. Do you really see such a difference between a Gazan and somebody in Cairo that they can't live together and be neighbors? That they wouldn't intermarry, that they wouldn't be
Yeah, but that also counts
loyal
for Jews. That
Egyptians?
also counts for Jews in New York or in Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's and it will be good for the Palestinians to step away from their own intra-party fratricidal existence. All they do is clash. Let me ask you a personal question. Who's going to replace the boss?
Who's gonna replace?
Abbas, Mahmoud Abbas, the current president of the Palestinian Authority, who's in his, I think, 19th year of his 4-year term.
Yeah.
Who's going to replace him? I mean,
Yeah.
which faction is going to take over? And by election, by assassination? I mean, they've got to transcend their own conflicts.
Yeah.
Evelyn, your
I know.
final question.
I agree with you, Jarrow, that the Palestinian identity seems to have to do mostly with wanting to erase Israel, not so much building their own nation and on the basis of a common culture and history. And I agree with that.
And by the way, who pays for it? Qatar. I wish Iran, but that means they sell oil, and then that supports the regime. Start with Qatar, boy. They funded Hamas. They funded Hezbollah. They're going to pay for this.
Do you know of any influential people or organizations who agree with your vision?
I suspect it's not right for me to talk for them, but I believe so. I'm getting more and more feedback that people find it interesting, compelling. The common wisdom has been, because it's not a unique proposal of Egypt to Jordan, but what's interesting about my paper is that it goes into such depth, covers so many topics, so many angles, and is region-wide.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you could call it a pathway to citizenships.
Oh, I like that.
And it allows Palestinians to be citizen dreamers also. Because statelessness is not good. There's can't remember which Azoni, but he wrote the virtue of nationalism. Was it David Azoni? And it's a wonderful idea in this book that the best guarantor, the best protector of individual freedom is the nation state.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Dennis Prager, God bless him, so many, many times, innumerable times, has said, the bigger the government, the smaller the individual. So you don't want this trans-internationalism and all that. No. You do want the Palestinians to be citizens, to be part of a state. Just at this point, it could not be clearer. This is not a culture that warrants statehood. When you look at the founding of America, the brilliant synthesis of the principles of enlightenment, the very best of the principles, and what would make it work is what resulted in the American experience and American exceptionalism. There is not one criteria of that the Palestinians' culture, society meets. They don't even respect each other. This tragedy has to end, and they need help to do it. And Martin Luther King would agree, we help ourselves in the process, not just as Jews. We help ourselves as Americans, as Western civilization, as human beings. And we can move on to other things.
Evelyn, did you ask your last question?
What would you advise our listeners to do if they want to support peace in the Middle East?
Write letters about this to the White House, to the State Department, to your senators, even your Congress member. Talk to your friends, talk to family. Talk to the organizations you donate to, you go to. This President Trump has put this issue on the public agenda, the world agenda. And it's an opportunity that should not become lost, shouldn't slip through the cracks. It shouldn't become befuddled. It needs focus, it needs shaping, it needs guidance, it needs push.
It's chutzpah. With that, we're going to end this show. This has been so informative. I hope our listeners will listen. They'll share it with their friends and start talking about it. For those of you who want to know more about Evelyn and myself, you can go to Never Again Is Now podcast at YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And as we end every show, we say, please speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.